So, hello everybody, welcome along. I'm here on behalf of Professor Garrod O'Line, who can't make it today, and I'd like to welcome you all to this seminar series, which is entitled Technology of Sport. This seminar will continue every Tuesday from this time, every second Tuesday, sorry, at this time, and probably in this room as well, but you'll receive email notifications if it changes. Today's session is called The Age of the Virtual Trainer and is presented by Shane Lowe here. Shane received his Bachelor of Engineering in Electronic Engineering at NUI Galway in 2009, and since then he's been pursuing his PhD in the Bioelectronics Research Cluster in the NCBES in NUI Galway. The focus of his research is on the development of wearable electronics for the monitoring of everyday physical activity and specifically their uses for older adults. So I'd like to welcome Shane, and it's all yours.
Thanks very much, mate. Right, so yeah, thanks everybody for coming. As Barry said, my research is to do with monitoring physical activity of the human body in whatever shape that may come. Recently, in the last year, I started on the path to becoming a certified personal trainer with the American Council on Exercise, and kind of those two paths have kind of brought me here together, the joining of technology and of personal training and sport. So, the age of the virtual trainer. Virtual trainers is basically using technology and integrating that into our sport and fitness world, integrating it into our personal fitness regimes. It's only really became possible in the last few years with smartphones and with cheap sensors. For example, if I asked a room like yourselves 5 years ago, what's an accelerometer? Good chance not one person would know. Whereas now I'd say well over half own one, and a good proportion of that probably have one in their pocket right now. So it's kind of an example of accelerometers, sensors like that have become an everyday item now. So I have to come out of frame here to change this. Sorry about that. So, what is a virtual trainer? Well, as I said, it uses technology to engage with sport and fitness. For the majority of this talk, I'm going to be talking about activity monitors. And what activity monitors are pieces of technology that monitor the human body and physical activity that's performed in any way, shape, or form. Any activity that's due to the skeletal system of the human body. So, you'll see a mistaken definition often where people will say activity monitors are for monitoring sport. And yeah, that's true, but that's a small part of what activity monitors do. The activities of your daily living, so the things that you do all day, every day, whether you walk to work, did you walk to lunch, did you sit down at your desk all day, those are important parts of activity as well. So I'm going to bring some maths into it here. Me being an engineer, I have to get maths in somehow. My daily calorie intake, for example, I'm using me, my daily calorie intake is about 2,800, which is relatively high, but I'd eat quite a bit, I'm relatively active. For my RMR, which is my resting metabolic rate, that's how much energy I use just staying alive, for my heart to pump, for my lungs to breathe, for my brain to keep functioning. My RMR is 1,700 calories. So those activities take 1,700 calories of energy per day. If I went for a half-hour run, 5-kilometre run every day, which is quite a bit, I don't, and if I did, that's 400 calories. It's not a huge amount of calories. It still leaves me with a 700 calorie deficit for my day. So those 700 calories are made up of those activities of daily living that I mentioned. So it's important not to focus just on sports and exercise. The activities of daily living are hugely important. They make up those 700 calories. If I didn't go for a run, they'd make up those 1,100 calories of a deficit. So when you're leaving today and you're going downstairs to leave this talk, the stairs will be in front of you and the lift will be around the corner. Think about the 700 calories when you're making your choice. And it's hugely important to not forget those type of activities. So why do they do it? What's the point in these activity monitors? What's our motivation for developing them? Well, I'm going to focus on 3 reasons. There are multiple reasons, but the main 3 important ones I'm going to talk about. The first one's kind of the heaviest one, the most important, the reason we really need to do this, and it's obesity. There's an obesity epidemic in the Western world. Specifically in this country, we are doing terribly on this front. If I asked you now, like, what's the biggest killer in the Western world? A lot of people would say cancer. It's not actually cancer, it's heart disease, which is caused by obesity. But cancer is the most expensive to treat, so I'm going to use that here for the example. In America, they spent $102 billion last year treating cancer. $102 billion. There's one thing that costs more than that, and that's obesity. They spent $147 billion treating obesity. Economically, it's a huge problem. You might think, yeah, but that's America, we're not there. And the truth is, yeah, we're not there yet. But we spent $440 million on cancer and $400 million on obesity. So we're catching up. That gap is getting smaller. In Ireland, we have 60% of our population are overweight or obese. 60%. that puts us at the top of the EU. We're not near the top. We're not one of the worst. We are the worst in the EU for overweight population. 23% of our boys under the age of 16, 28% of our girls under the age of 16 are overweight or obese. We have this problem very badly in Ireland. And you might ask the question, why? Where did this problem come from? And it's a complicated question and there's complicated answers. You can talk about how our society has changed from manual labour and having loads of free time. We have more stress now. There's hugely complicated answers. But the simplest one is, and you can simplify it like this, we went from being active and eating healthily to being inactive and eating unhealthily. Sorry, can I just ask you to set up my laptop, please? So we've gone from active and healthy to inactive and unhealthy. And that's how simple you can bring this problem down to. So that's the obesity. That's the kind of heavy one out of the way. The next kind of problem, Finally, the next reason is more interesting, it's easier to talk about, and it's less heavy. It's called quantified self. Quantified self is another movement that came with the dawn of the smartphone, the dawn of the cheap sensor. And it's the process of keeping close control and close monitoring of any aspect of your life to help you engage and enhance that aspect of your life. So basically, quantified self generates data. And using the data, you can engage with that aspect. To try and clear it up a bit, I'm going to take 4 examples, 4 aspects of your life. Your health, your finances, your diet, and your sleep. 4 really important aspects. If any one of these starts going downhill, life gets a little bit less enjoyable. So, for example, health. Microsoft have a product called Health Vault. It's an online website. You log in, you have your own profile. Anything to do with your health, whether if you get sick or if you need to visit the doctor, if you're on medication, if you went to the dentist, if you had an operation, whatever it is, you log it in Health Vault. You tell Health Vault, this happened to do with my health. Health Vault will then give you graphs of all these different things. And over a 6-month, 9-month period, you can look back at all this data about your health. And you can see when you were sick. So were you sick after you changed your diet? Or were you sick after a long weekend? Did changing your diet help? So from the data that you can see over the last 6 months, you can kind of predict what you need to stop doing or what you need to do more to affect your health in a good way. Your finances, particularly relevant aspect of all of our lives today, always for students, any students in the room. This is an app called Moneybook. It runs on the iPhone. You log any expenditure you have. Whatever you spend your money on, you put the category you spent it on, whether it was rent, food, drink, your bills, whatever it was, you log it into Moneybook. At the end of the month then, it'll give you a graph of where all your money went, what categories you spent most on. So you'd use that kind of data. I started using that when I was a student. And like the month where you spent more on drink than you did on food, you have to kind of sit down and try and consider what went on here, and you have to try and engage with that part of your life. So that's another example of finances. Diet, again, similar thing. You just put in all the calories you had today. So any meal you have, you just write down, I had this for my meal, and it'll say the calorie input or the calorie intake that that meal represents. And then you can just keep track to make sure you're not overeating. And similar aspect again, or similar theme again as the others I talked about. Lastly, sleep, very similar thing again. The one on the bottom right here is an iPhone app. Using the accelerometer, which is a word I'm going to be using a lot today. The accelerometer, you put it under your pillow, the phone under your pillow, and using the accelerometer, it measures how active you were during your sleep. So if you're not moving around the bed, you're in a deep sleep, it's saying. If you are moving around the bed, then you're in a light sleep. So it measures the quality of your sleep and how long you slept for. A step up on that is called Zeo, just next to it. And it's a little sensor that wraps around your head. You have a little sensor in your forehead, and it measures electrical activity at your forehead, which can be translated into brain activity. So from that, it will measure whether you are lightly sleeping, deep sleeping, REM sleep, or if you're awake. And it's just a similar thing. Activity can come into this. You can monitor your activity closely like that so that you notice aspects or anomalies in your physical activity, and you can engage with them and change them for the better. So that's quantified self. The third reason, and possibly the most relevant for today's talk, is performance optimization. Performance optimization I'm talking about here is our amateur athletes, probably several of the people in this room. Amateur athletes tend to not be happy being amateur. We all want to be elite. We all want to be the professional athlete. So when technology can help that, we'll all jump on board. Technology like this has been around in elite sports for decades. So premiership teams that have this type of technology for quite a long time. It's now with the smartphones and with the cheap sensors in our own domain. So we're jumping on board that. If it can help take a couple of seconds off your time or get your performance that bit boosted, we're all jumping on top of that. So that's a massive market for virtual trainers. I'm going to touch back on this because, as Barry said, my research focuses on activities of daily living. So I just want to be clear so that everybody knows the difference between activity to daily living and exercise activity. So activities of daily living, you're talking about words like these: how long you spent sitting, did you walk to work, did you climb stairs, did you hoover when you went home, did DIY. Any work that you did that's not exercise is an activity of daily living. Exercise activity, you're talking more sporty terms: intensity, training zone, heart rate, distance, average speed, fatigue. Words like this is what I'm going to be concentrating on for the rest of the talk. Virtual trainers, like I'm going to show you for exercise, do exist for the activities of daily living domain. For the last 10 years of that, it's been quite an active research area. But it's only in the last 18 months, maybe 2 years tops, that they've actually come into the consumer domain. So here's two devices. They're both around the $100 mark. The one on the left is the Philips Direct Life, and this one here is called a Fitbit. And basically you just wear those throughout your day, and it'll measure things like how many steps you took, how far you walked, did you use the stairs, and it'll give you an estimate for how many calories you took. So we all know there's these targets we aim for 10,000 steps a day and similar things like that. This type of thing will measure that and just tell you how you're getting on in your daily activity. So I'm going to leave the activities of daily living behind now, and I'm going to focus on exercise. So hopefully I've shown you the motivation for developing these products, why we should do that. Now I'm going to show you what they can do for you. So before the virtual trainer, before activity monitors came into the world, if you wanted to optimize your exercise, if you wanted to get the best results, you went to a personal trainer. Personal trainers have a lot of training. They learn things like physiology, psychology, the best possible sports science that you can do to optimize your results. The course I'm doing, this is an example of some of the reading material to become a personal trainer. So don't doubt the personal trainers really do know what they're talking about. So when we try to replace the personal trainer with a virtual trainer, that's never going to work. We can't replace them completely. You're just never going to match the experience and the knowledge that a real personal trainer can bring to the table. But if we consult personal trainers and try and bring in some of their knowledge and try and get them helping us to design virtual trainers, we can get the best possible replica that we can. So a personal trainer, if you go to them, they'll ask you what's your current ability, and they'll do some tests to find that out. They'll ask you what your goal is. And from your current ability and your goal, they'll design a training program to the best possible way to get you towards that goal. The second thing they'll do is they'll monitor you as you do your regime, as you do the exercise design that they've given you. They'll monitor your progress. They'll motivate you to keep at that. If you miss a few training sessions, you'll have the personal trainer dogging you on the phone, getting you in to get exercise, and motivation is a hugely important part of what a personal trainer does. And lastly, they'll educate you. In physical fitness and in exercise, like in anything, knowledge is everything. A personal trainer's job, you have to put it at like 30% of a personal trainer's job is to spread knowledge about fitness. If we can get the knowledge about fitness and exercise to the general public better, we might be able to solve the obesity problem. We might be able to help people get better at their sport or better at their fitness. So knowledge really is everything. So the most logical step for a virtual trainer to take at the dawn of the virtual trainer was to try and emulate directly what a personal trainer does, to try and pretty much copy what they do. So that's what the virtual trainer did. In the bottom right here, I just have a couple of examples. The bottom right is a very simple example. It's an app for Android. It's called 100 Push-Ups. Pretty simple app. It does exactly what it says. It tries to get you from doing how many push-ups you can do now to doing 100 push-ups in one set. So you tell it, again, your current ability, like you would with a personal trainer, how long you want to train for. And it will design, and you tell it your goal is 100 push-ups. It'll design how many sets and how many reps you need to be doing and how often a week you should be doing that to get you towards your goal. So it's a very simple app, that's fair enough, but it is a nice example of trying to emulate directly what a physical trainer will do for you, a personal trainer will do for you. The top right is an app called Nike Boom, which is the best app name ever. Boom tries to emulate the motivational aspect of a personal trainer. So if you're running down the road or you're doing your weights, it'll play music to you over your iPhone, nothing new there. But periodically, a famous athlete, the one here is Jerry Rice, it also has Joe Cole, LeBron James, any of the bigger athletes that are signed up with Nike, will come on over the radio or over the earphones periodically and start shouting motivational slogans at you. So you're running down the road and you've 1 mile left and you're thinking about quitting. LeBron James comes on screaming at you to keep going. The idea is it just motivates you to get that bit further. It's not my really cup of tea, it's kind of funny to me, but it's a nice example again of trying to emulate a personal trainer. Top left here now is where we get really serious about these. This is called Nike Trainer. Nike Trainer, again, will take your current ability and your goals and design an exercise program for you. The difference here is, if anyone here has been involved in exercise and sport, they've probably been told before, they've heard the idea before, that it's all well and good doing exercise, but if you're not going to do it properly, you don't get any of the benefits. So Nike Trainer will design a program for you, but it also will show you videos of exactly how you should perform each exercise. So it'll incorporate resistance training and cardio training and some plyometrics. There's all sorts of exercise involved, and it'll show you exactly how to do it to get the best possible results. So that's kind of some of the education aspect of the personal trainer. The bottom left app here is probably my favorite app. It's called iMuscle. It's only on the iPhone. Again, we'll go back to the thing where it'll take your current ability and your goals. It'll design a exercise program for you. Then it'll show you how to do it. The bottom left here is a little animation. It'll show the little man doing crunches here on the ball. Then the middle, this is where it gets different. In the middle screen here is a different tab. It'll show you exactly which muscles you're targeting. So this is, again, the educational aspect, to show you what muscles each exercise targets. And on the following tab, it goes that bit further. It'll show you a breakdown. So this person is doing squats or some other type of leg exercise. And it'll show you a breakdown of how the tendons and how the muscles interact during that exercise. So that's a very powerful tool for learning how things are actually working when you're exercising. That app really is, that app in the bottom left and the app in the top left in particular are just fantastically well designed apps. And they do a brilliant job of emulating what a personal trainer will do for you. So that's an example of trying to copy a personal trainer. But when we're bringing technology into a new world, into whatever that new world is, in this case we're talking about exercise, it's important that we don't get so caught up with trying to create the carbon copy of what the existing solution is, trying to match the advantages of the existing solution, that we forget about all the extra components that technology can bring to the table, all the extra things that technology can do that perhaps the existing solution can't do. And it's easy to get caught up in that carbon copy, and you see it quite a lot. So the virtual trainer in particular, technology can bring so much to the table that it was hugely important not to get caught up in that type of thing. So some of the things that technology can bring to the table are sensing abilities. So we can sense things, biometric properties, things about your body when you're exercising that are just much more difficult for a personal trainer to try and keep track of. So I won't go into depth here because I am going to go further later on. But an example of some of them are, here's a heart rate monitor. It's very hard for a personal trainer to keep track of your heart rate every time you exercise, but technology can do that. And the middle app here uses GPS when you're running or cycling, whatever outdoor activity it may be. And it'll measure how far you've ran, how fast you're on, your average speed, your best speed per kilometre, when you got fatigued, how many hills did you go up and how many hills did you go down? Did you try and keep if you're a cyclist, did you try and keep your uphill times down, your technique for going uphill versus downhill? Massive amounts of information you can get just purely from GPS. That's brought to the table by a sensor like that. Top left is just a little pressure sensor I'm going to explain in a while, but it just counts your steps. How many steps do you take during that exercise? That's an aspect of your training that's useful to know. How far you ran is one thing, but how many steps you took is another thing. Some runs are nice and flat and straight run. You'll run the same distance like that up over hilly ground or in a forest trail and take far more steps. You'll burn far more calories. So something like that a personal trainer can't possibly be expected to keep track of, but it's quite easy with technology. So I'm going to go further into the technology now. Now, I'm conscious that there are non-engineers in the room, so I'm not going to go into sample frequencies and filtering and all these write-down engineering concepts. But I do think it's important that you have an idea of what type of technologies are inside these activity monitors. So on the top left, it's called an accelerometer. It's kind of the granddad of all these activity monitors. It was the first one. It's probably the most important sensor that happened to this type of thing ever. They've been around for about 100 years. Not at all new technology. The way they work has changed quite a bit. We can probably thank Mercedes, though, for getting them into our own pockets. Mercedes decided that accelerometers were a good way to set off airbags. So you're crashing, an accelerometer will measure acceleration. So if you're driving down the road and you crash, you'll have a massive deceleration. An accelerometer can measure that and deploy the airbag. So Mercedes put it in their cars, then everybody else started putting it in their cars, then everybody started putting 5 or 6 in each car, and so you can buy an accelerometer for €5–6 now. That's just out of this world in comparison to what they were only a few years ago. So accelerometers are widely used. Most of you probably do own one. The middle sensor on the top is called an altimeter. It will measure atmospheric pressure. And why that's useful in an exercise context is atmospheric pressure will give you altitude. So say cycling, altitude is a hugely important aspect of that sport. Hills are kind of everything in cycling. If you talk to any cyclist, a route is completely different depending on its hills. So a sensor that measures distance is great, but one that measures distance and your elevation and how much altitude you gained and lost is a much more powerful sensor. So an altimeter is important for that. The next one is just a force sensor, very basic technology. You put it under your foot and it'll measure when you put force on the top of it. So every time you take a step, you lift your foot, you take your force off, you put it back down, you put the force back on, and it knows you took a step. So it's basic technology, but you can get how many steps a person takes from it. The bottom left is GPS, Global Positioning Service. Most of you probably have heard of GPS if you have a GPS in your car, or most people will have it on one of their phones now. GPS has satellites up in the atmosphere. I don't know if I need to go into this, but I will. Satellites up in the atmosphere. If you have between 4 and 14 GPS satellites locked onto your phone, you can triangulate your position. So it'll take your position on the Earth and your altitude from GPS. That's all it measures, but from that you can get quite a bit that I'll talk again about later on. The bottom right is a polar heart rate monitor chip. You'll see heart rate monitors in different shops, different shapes and sizes, different companies. The majority of them contain this chip. Whether they're a polar heart rate monitor or not, they contain this chip. And what the chip will do is measure electrical activity in your muscles at your chest. Your heart is just a muscle, so it will be able to detect heart rate from that activity. So it's just a heart rate monitor. And in the middle, I've put Bluetooth, the symbol for Bluetooth. We've reached a stage now where people won't tolerate wires. Nobody will be happy if you have a phone in your pocket and you have to plug that into a sensor at your foot. That's just not acceptable anymore. So whether it's Bluetooth or Zigbee, or most of you will probably know the iPhone have a combination with Nike. There's Nike sensors that I'm going to go into in a while. They use their own proprietary system. It's a 2.4 gigahertz proprietary system. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's wireless, and it's an important part of activity monitors today. So that's kind of the majority of what's inside these activity monitors. Just before I move on to this slide, I just want to say none of the hardware that I talked about there is particularly advanced. It's all been around for quite a few years, and that's not all that novel. We don't really pat them on their back for using that technology. It's what they do with the data that comes out of those sensors that differs. It's what they do with that data that gets impressive. So, important question is, what will it do for me? Why do I want to buy one of these things? How does it help me? I'm going to say 3 different things: motivation, progress, and performance. So for motivation, I mentioned how important part of the personal trainer's duties is to motivate you, to get you up out of bed, or to get you out to the gym after work. We all know how that can be hard. One of the hardest things in the world to do is if somebody is not active, if somebody's not used to being active, they're sedentary most of their time, changing human behaviour in someone like that is one of the most difficult things to do in the world. A personal trainer gets a lot of education on how to change behaviour like that. The problem is a virtual trainer is far easier to ignore than a personal trainer. Personal trainers are normally big people, they're big fit people, they're scary enough, they start shouting at you, it's encouraging to get up. A virtual trainer, your phone starts beeping, you just press silent and that's that. So a virtual trainer has to be far more cunning and devious with the psychology that it brings in to try and make you get up and be motivated to exercise. So a couple of concepts I'm going to talk about. Behavioural psychology is a scary thing to me. Behavioural psychologists can use things like these. Now I'm going to give a couple of examples, but I'm not a behavioural psychologist, so don't take, there is far more involved than what I'm going to talk about. But a behavioural psychologist can make you do whatever they want. They can, even if you know you're being manipulated, you can still be made do whatever they want. My girlfriend is a behavioural psychologist, I know this. You can be tricked into doing whatever, even if you know you're being tricked. So some of the aspects that a virtual trainer will bring in: positive reinforcement. Seems pretty simple. You know when you're being reinforced. But the fact is, it's so reinforcing, you want whatever the reinforcer is so much that you'll ignore that you're being manipulated. So an example of positive reinforcement: Nike Plus. Nike Plus has all the sensors that I'm going to talk about in a while. But online, you have a dashboard, like your Facebook account or whatever account you have a dashboard that will keep track of all your exercise. And one of the things on your dashboard are badges or trophies. Nike Plus will set you challenges. You can set yourself challenges, or other people can set you a challenge. So say running a kilometre under 4 minutes. If you can make that, it'll give you a badge, it'll give you a trophy. If you can make 100 kilometres in a month ran, it'll give you a badge, it'll give you a trophy. And you might think, whatever, like it's only a picture of a badge on a website, who cares? But when you're using Nike Plus and you're watching this closely, it's that type of thing. It's the badge that's just out of your reach. The 4 kilometre or the 4 minute kilometre, I found that quite hard to get past. And it'll keep you awake at night trying to think how you're going to get this thing. You want it so bad when it's just out of your reach. So positive reinforcement that way does 2 things. It'll show you your achievements when you do it, which will make you feel good about how you're exercising. And it'll challenge you, which is reinforcing, which will make you get up and do your exercise, make you go for that run. The next one I'm going to talk about is punishment. Now, punishment's kind of the other side of the coin of the positive reinforcement. The Wii is the example I'm going to give for this. Most of you probably know what the Wii is. It's a video game that has a motion input. Again, accelerometers and gyroscopes, which are 2 kind of kinematic sensors, sensing motion, are the input to the Wii. But the Wii, which is from Nintendo, brought out a thing called Wii Fit, which is basically just a force plate. If anyone's familiar with force plates, It's a slab that you put on the floor, and when you stand on it, it'll measure the forces that you're putting down on the force plate. So you can measure balance and whether you're favouring your right leg or your left leg. So you do kind of semi-static exercises like squats and things like that, and it'll measure your balance. But the Wii will bring in a punishing thing. So it'll, again, back to the thing, it'll take your current ability and your goals, and it'll design a program for you. If you miss a couple of your sessions, it says be here on Tuesday and Thursday, and you miss both of them. Next time you turn it on, the little wee man comes up and starts scolding you. Where were you? Why weren't you here? What were you doing? Giving out to you for not exercising, trying to guilt you into coming back to exercise next time. That's kind of punishing for missing the 2 exercise bouts that you missed. The problem with punishment is it can be aversive. And that means that some people, myself included, will turn on the Wii and the man will start giving out to you. And you'll say, well, to hell with this, and turn him off. And not turn it on the next day. You just don't want to turn it on the next day. It's just aversive, subconsciously even. Makes you not feel good about the Wii. So punishment was in the Wii, but it didn't come into any of the other activity monitors, any of the other virtual trainers that I'm going to talk about. They tried it. In my opinion, it didn't work, and nobody else took up on it. Another one is social reinforcement, which I think is a really powerful one. A kind of nice example of social reinforcement is NICE+'s integration with Facebook. So if you integrate your Facebook with your NICE+, you give NICE+ permission to post to your Facebook wall. So I have this done now. So I go for a run, and I have my phone in my pocket, and my phone posts to Facebook, Shane just went on a run. If anybody of my friends, if anybody's on my Facebook and likes that status, it'll come into my ears, Dallin just liked my status, and it'll start cheering me. It's a bit of a silly idea, but it's a nice idea. You're running and you've got a kilometre left of your 10-kilometre run, and you're finding it hard thinking about stopping. Somebody comes over your ear cheering, saying, keep going. It's just a nice thought to get you through that wall, get you through to the final kilometre. A more powerful form of social reinforcement here is you can have a social network. So on NICE+, everything these days is social. On NICE+, they make your exercise social. You can set your friends up who all have NICE+ in a little group, and I can see how many kilometres this guy ran. So this week, he ran 5 kilometres 3 times. He can see I only ran 5 kilometres once, and I was slower than him. So that's motivating for me to get up the following day and try and catch up with him, try and beat him. It's kind of peer pressure, but in a good way. That's a kind of form of social reinforcement, and even more powerful is I can challenge him. I can go for a run today and say, I ran 5 kilometres in 22 minutes, and say, Barry, you've got 2 days to try and beat it. And you can put money on it, or you can start making a game out of it, whatever you might want to do. Just that's hugely motivating for Barry to get up and go for that run to try and beat my time. That's social reinforcement. So that's kind of a picture of how the virtual trainer will try and emulate the duties of a personal trainer, but also bring in the sensing and the possibilities from technology like the social network and like the internet. So that's motivation. The next one I'm going to talk about is progress. So quantified self, I talked about closely monitoring progress to help you engage with and enhance the exercise experience. So I think the best way for me to talk about this is I'm going to give an example of my own life. Earlier this year, I was running quite a bit. I was not a huge amount of distance, maybe 8-9 kilometres, and I was trying to do it as fast as I could. I was trying to get my cardio fitness up. And I was running mostly in Galway, but also at home in Carrick-on-Shannon. So over a couple of weeks, I started noticing that all my best times were at home in Carrick. I never bet my Carrick times in Galway, either for average speed over the whole 8-9 kilometres or for my best kilometre times. I could never beat my time at home. And I was trying to figure out what that was like. It's just an anomaly in how I train. And when I'm in Galway, I run on a concrete path. So I run on a concrete path kind of from here to Salt Hill and do a little loop. When I'm at home, I run on a forest trail with hills. So I could rule out that the route was harder. It couldn't be. It's so easy in Galway and it's quite hard at home. So it wasn't the route. I thought then maybe in Galway I might be meeting traffic. It might be the paths are busy or traffic lights are stopping me. So I went for 2 or 3 runs and took note of every time I had to stop. And yeah, that did introduce a bit of a delay. But there was several kilometres where a full kilometre I'd run without being interrupted at all. So it might explain why my average speed was a little slower, but it didn't explain why my best kilometre speed was slower at all. And then I thought, in Galway, I train on my own, whereas at home I don't. And at home, he'd be a bit fitter than me and he'd be a bit faster than me. And whereas I'd stop for puddles and that, he'd power through and he'd jump over trees and fences. And he's a 42 kilo Alsatian. And he's strapped to my wrist. So there's a good chance if I stop, I've got an 8-9 metre draggle on the ground before he stops. So it might sound like a funny example, but the fact is, when I'm at home, I run faster. And it doesn't matter what it is. I thought first maybe it's because he's dragging me, but I took note of when I was running with him, and him dragging me slows me down more than anything, because I have to try and use my upper body as well as my lower body. So it's not that. It's not a social thing. I don't care what Max thinks of how I'm running. I've no idea what it is. But I found an anomaly in my training that makes me train better. So I started running more at home with the dog, trying to get 2 runs in every weekend with the dog. And it helped me improve my performance. I got about 3 minutes off my 5 kilometre time. I'm still not winning any races, but I'm not sure I would have got that advantage if I hadn't figured out the thing with Max, if I hadn't figured out that's the best way to make me give my all, get my heart rate up as high as I could. It's just an example. I'm not saying everybody should run with a dog, but it's an example of how I saw an anomaly in my training through quantified self and was able to engage and enhance my exercise. Lastly is performance. So I talked about optimal performance. Again, if anyone heard that if you're going to do exercise, you have to do it properly. The fact is, if you're just trying to keep a bit of fitness or maybe lose a small amount of weight, doing any activity is fantastic. Nobody should ever be discouraged from doing any type of activity, whether they know what they're doing or not. But to see real results, to see real weight loss or muscle gain or performance improvements, you have to bring sports science into it. Your whole exercise has to be planned around sports science. A personal trainer will do it. Like I said, there's plenty of material a personal trainer has to learn. A virtual trainer has to do it. So the Nike Plus, I'm going to bring us back to again. It will do that. It will bring sports science into your training regime. So back to the same old principle. You give Nike Plus your current ability. See up in the top there, I have myself as intermediate. So there's maybe 7 or 8 different things you can classify yourself as. Say how long I want to train for, and my goal is 5K. So Nike Plus will give you a few different things. Do you want to improve your 5K time, your 10K time? Do you want to run a half marathon or do you want to run a marathon? And it will bring sports science into it and design a program for you. So the program it's designed here for me varies in the distance it wants me to run and the speed it wants me to run at. So it will incorporate long runs to get my endurance and my muscles up, short runs with interval training to try and get my cardio fitness up, and days off, rest days, to avoid burnout. Those are 3 relatively simple sports science techniques or sports science concepts. But the vast majority of the lay people won't know that, won't know about these simple aspects of sports science. So the fact that Nike Plus can bring that in is good news. It's fantastic. But I've talked mostly about Nike Plus today, and the reason is I talked about motivation. The Nike Plus just went all out on motivation. They brought behavioural psychologists in, and they just really put a huge amount of effort into that, and they nailed it. You won't find a better motivational tool than Nike Plus. But my coach, Adidas' rival, this is where they chose to focus on sports science. Adidas, my coach, will differentiate between soccer and basketball. Nike Plus won't do that. So, an example, the theory out there about why the US can't compete at soccer. And some people say it's just that they're not interested in it. But the fact is the US is so big, the amount of people that they have playing soccer is really substantial. They really should be competing on an international level at soccer. And the reason is, or as the theory goes, is that soccer goes against the core concepts of main American sports. So you think American football, basketball, and say hockey. They reward size, power, and strength. That's the 3 kind of real things you need to be successful with that sport. Whereas if you look at the elite soccer players, the best soccer players in the world, yeah, they'll be big guys sometimes, but they're on the shorter side in comparison to those athletes. Yeah, they'll be strong, but they're never really that built. They're always kind of small guys with low centres of gravity. They're fast, but far more importantly, acceleration in soccer is more important. So it's just different between those sports. Another example is any soccer fans here know Aidan McGeady. Any non-soccer fans, he's a player for Ireland, and he came on the scene a couple of years ago, and he's a winger. Like, his job is to beat players with the ball. And he came on the scene with a huge amount of excitement. He was going to be our new talisman. He was world class. He was going to be brilliant. And arguably, it never really came. And the underage coaches that worked with him on the Ireland level would tell you that it's because Aidan McGeady can beat any man in the world. He's as good as anybody at taking the ball by a man. On a good day, he really will beat anybody. The problem is, it's the next step. He'll take the ball by his man, and the next step, he doesn't have the explosive acceleration that you need to get the ball away. So with acceleration, you're Messi. Without it, you're Aidan McGeady. And I'm not saying I'd turn down Aidan McGeady and we'll all be praying for him on Friday, but that's an aspect of his game that's just fallen down. It's specific to soccer, that acceleration. So I'm not going to tell Aidan McGeady how to train, but if an amateur soccer player had that type of problem, they need to target acceleration. They need to target plyometrics or other acceleration type training. And my coach will do that, whereas other virtual trainers out there won't do that. So to kind of go a little bit further in depth in that, cardio conditioning for sports is the program that I do with my coach. Cardio conditioning for sports is very different to cardio conditioning for a long time race or a long duration cycle. Cardio conditioning for sports, in sports you start and stop a lot. It's very interval based. So the best way to get cardio fitness up for that type of sport is interval training. So my coach knows that. The idea behind interval training is you get your heart rate up, then you get it back down again and up and down again. So you do a lot of sprinting, then back down to recover your heart rate. My coach knows about that. This is my program here myself. So see workout 15 there. It has an interval training set up for me for 22 minutes. It's not a long workout. The blue, the green, and the red represents heart rate. So for the first, couple of minutes that I'm running, this is a running course, I have my coach plugged into my ear, and I'll run for 2 minutes, and then she'll tell me, get up to the green zone, get your heart rate up to the green zone, and I'll get it up to the green zone. Then she'll say, get to the red zone, and I'll get to the red zone. And then she'll say, stop, and just rest. And she's telling you exactly what to do the whole time. She's coaching you all the time. That's kind of my coach had a fantastic setup with that. They really did, like Nike Plus in the motivation arena. My coach went all out in this sports science arena, and they just did a fantastic job. So I'm going to move on now. Hopefully I've shown the last while that a virtual trainer can do a pretty good job of emulating the jobs of a personal trainer. They can even outdo the personal trainer in some aspects. I'll reiterate again that we'll never replace a personal trainer. You just cannot replace human experience and human knowledge. But by designing our virtual trainers in consultation with the personal trainers and in consultation with some behavioural science knowledge, we can kind of do a pretty good job of replicating what they do, maybe not replacing them. So now I want to talk about a few of the specific things that are out there. In my opinion, the best things on the market at the minute. I picked 5. So I've got 3 kind of app-based things. The My Coach, which I've mentioned, Runkeeper, which is an app, and the bottom left is Nike Plus, which again I've mentioned. Up here is Polar Heart Rate Monitor, which is, I'll go through in a second, it's kind of more simple. And the bottom right is a hugely exciting thing. You can see it there, and I'm going to go through it in a lot of detail. It's called the Connect. And whereas the other ones are portable and you can exercise anywhere with them, the Connect is kind of more focused on home exercise. Exercise in your own home, to save you having to go to the gym, or for people who prefer not to exercise outside, you can do it at home with the Connect, and I'm going to go into detail on that in a few minutes. So, Polar Heart Rate Monitor does exactly what it says. It's a heart rate monitor. That's all it does. Well, there's a few things. It'll estimate your calories, and some of them will have a foot sensor to say how far you went. But this is it. You have a watch, and you have a heart rate strap. You strap the heart rate around your chest, and you put on the watch, and the watch displays your heart rate. So if you know what you're doing, if you don't need somebody telling you in your ear what heart rate you should be in, if you're a personal trainer yourself or just are well up on this kind of knowledge, this kind of thing is perfect. You just glance at the watch, it'll tell you your heart rate. If you know what to do with that information, then this thing is perfect. It's 45, 50 euro, and it's just perfect. There's not a huge amount more I can say about that. It does exactly what it says, and it does it well. Next is Runkeeper. Runkeeper is just an app, and it works on your iPhone or your Android. You don't need any other sensors. It uses GPS. So from GPS, you get position. So that's all GPS will give you, position and altitude. But from position, you can check the distance you've ran, the speed you ran at, like I said, average speed over the whole trip, or average speed per kilometre, and what's your best kilometre speed. Did you go up hills, did you go down hills? Again, Runkeeper has, like Nike Plus and My Coach, an online interface, a dashboard, where it'll give you graphs of how you did over the last 6 months, how much you trained, and what was your best training, and where you did your best training. It's kind of an example of using a single technology, GPS, getting everything you can from GPS and doing it really well. There are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of these on the app stores, on the app market, on the Apple store. But I would say that Runkeeper is just the best at doing it. It's a startup company. It didn't come out under Nike Plus or Adidas. They started on their own. They decided to make this app, and they just did it really well. So the biggest thing you can say about it is it's free. In the crazy world we have now, this must have cost a lot of money to develop. It's developed really well, and yet you can buy it for free, get it for free. So it's just a really good example of doing something simple, but doing it very well. This is where it gets kind of more advanced now. It gets more interesting. Nike Plus, I've mentioned it a couple of times. There's a couple of combinations that you can use for Nike Plus. So on the bottom left is just the app. So like Runkeeper, you can use GPS and get the same information from GPS and do it very well on Nike Plus. It'll upload all that to this online dashboard that I talked about, where you can set the challenges and get the motivation like I talked about. The second combination is the FootPod, which is the little orange thing, which is an example up here. So tiny little yoke, just goes under your foot in your shoe, and every time you put pressure on it, it knows you took a step. You can get the FootPod to talk to this sports band, the Nike sports band. It's just a little watch that goes on your wrist. You don't need anything else. You don't need a phone or the internet or GPS or anything else. The sports band will just display how far you've gone and an estimate for how many calories you've burned and how fast you're going. So it's just an example of a really simple thing. It doesn't give you too much information, but what it does give you, it gives you well. The little black part of the sports band will plug out and plug into the USB in your computer. So all of the data that you've gained during your run can be uploaded again to this Nike dashboard online to give you all that information, all the social benefits that I talked about. The last combination is iPod Nano with the Nike Plus. So like I said, iPod and Nike got together and came up with this 2.4 gigahertz proprietary wireless protocol. So they talk to each other, but they won't talk to anything else, basically, is what that means. So you can run with your iPod Nano and get all the same benefits as with the sports band. You don't have GPS, but you can get the pace and how far you've gone. iPod Nano again plugs into the laptop, and through iTunes all gets uploaded to Nike Plus. So basically Nike Plus, or Nike even, as a company decided one kind of combination, telling people what they have to do isn't good enough. You have to give them an option. Some people don't want to carry around their phone. Some people don't have a smartphone. So they decided to give a couple of different options. But the end result is the same. Data gets uploaded to the online dashboard. So here's an example of a run, 6.37 kilometers. It's just a lot of data here. 32 minutes it took me. What is it? That's my distance. My average time was 5 minutes per kilometer. Burned 446 calories. I felt awesome that day. After you do your run, it'll ask you how you felt, and I felt awesome. It was sunny, and I ran in a forest, so that's probably why I felt awesome. So this is an example of me running at home with the dog through the forest. So it'll just give you examples like that, and if I was to zoom out one level from that, it'll show me that run in comparison to all my other runs, and the stats about each, and which was better and which was worse, and that's how I noticed the thing with the dog. So it's just, that's how it'll display it to you. Here's an example of the challenges I kind of talked about. So a challenge might be, I want to run faster. And the default values there are pretty slow, but that's the default values. You want to set yourself that goal. If you meet that goal, it'll give you the little badge, it gives you a little cup, and it goes in your dashboard, and it's just there to show you that you achieved that goal. Other goals you can have is to run more often. So it'll say to you, run 20 times in the month, or whatever it might be, and you get a badge for it. And run further is, they're all pretty self-explanatory. Run further is to get to a certain distance mark in the month, burn more calories, set coach program, like I talked about with the 5K. In here, you can set yourself that goal, and you can also set your friend that goal. So like I talked about social reinforcement, I can set Barry the goal of beating me to that before, getting to that before me, beating me to the goal. So that's the social thing. I could spend all day kind of going through all the features of the online dashboard. I'm going to move on. The best thing really to do is just to set it up. It's free. You can set it up and explore yourselves. Next is MyCoach, and in a similar way, you can have several different combinations of MyCoach. You can start with the app and get the same thing as Runkeeper and Nike Plus using GPS. You can have the Adidas Pacer, which is the thing in the middle, and that works along with the heart rate sensor. And what the Pacer does is Adidas decided not everybody has a smartphone, so we shouldn't force them to have one. The Pacer will do everything that the phone will do, but it just doesn't have a screen, or it's just, you don't have to have a smartphone. It will talk to you and it'll tell you exactly what you want to do. So you plug it into your computer, your online dashboard you've set up all, whether you're doing cardio conditioning for sports or whether you're training for basketball or whatever it is, it'll download your coaching program onto this little chip here. It's a nice small little thing. You clip it onto your waistband and run, and she tells you in your ear what you should be doing, what heart rate zone you should be in. In that combination, the heart rate sensor will talk to the Pacer, to the little chip that's on your waistband. Another combination, which is the one I use, is you can use the phone app, the heart rate sensor, and then this thing, the wristband. I'll show you it here. I'll just get you to pass that around while I'm talking. So I'm wearing a heart rate sensor. And something I haven't mentioned so far is user interface when you're exercising. User interface is always very important, and kind of Apple have demonstrated that in the last while with the success of their iPod and their iPad. User interface is everything. More so in exercise. When you're running down the road or you're playing basketball or whatever you're playing, you don't have time to go looking at a display. You don't have time to take out your phone and start looking at it. You don't want to anyways. What Adidas came up with was this little wristband that's being passed around. You can see here a little LED. That LED will change colour from white to red depending on what training zone I'm in. So if it's white, that's kind of resting heart rate. Your one will tell me in my ear, get up to the green. So I start running faster until my watch goes green. And all I have to do is glance at it, and I know I'm in that training zone. So it's just an example of how they saw the user interface on the phone isn't enough, and they come up with just a simplified version, and it just works really well. Now, the difference is the watch doesn't talk to the heart rate sensor. So when she tells you to get to the red zone, she trusts that you got to the red zone. So whereas if you're using the Pacer, you get graphs of your heart rate throughout your run. With the watch, you won't get that. You just have to trust yourself to do whatever she tells you to do in your ear. So that's the combination of MyCoach. Now, I'd really like to go through MyCoach more because I really do like the coaching of it. But Adidas got attacked by hackers last Thursday, and the website is down, assumed to be back tomorrow. So I can't go any further than kind of this page. This is just an example. I track myself every morning on my commute to work. It's a 15-minute cycle. So it just tells you stuff like the Nike Plus, well, calories, how far I went, my average speed. If I could click on stuff now, which I can't because the hackers blend them, it'll give you a graph of my elevation. So it'll show my speed would have went down when I was going uphill and would have went up when I'm going downhill. Things like that, that elite people, or if I was training to be a cyclist, would mean a whole lot to me, and it would mean a change in how I do my exercise, how I do my cycling. So that's the kind of My Coach interface. Again, it's free. I'd encourage anybody to just sign up to it and have a look around. Now I'm going to get to the kind of bit that I think is the most exciting. This is called Microsoft Connect. Connect, on the face of it, looks like an image processing camera. So it looks like you stand in front of it and it does complicated algorithms to try and figure out where you are from. It takes a picture of the background and tries to subtract that from your image, and it's all very complicated. Connect is brilliant in its simplicity. It's much more than just an image processing algorithm. It has one camera, normal camera, it has one infrared camera, and it has one infrared array. So the infrared array projects these dots like lasers out onto your sitting room. So see in the bottom left there, you can see a guy's hand in front of the Connect. So you step out of frame, and it'll send out this matrix of dots throughout your whole room. And because there's no person in the frame, it'll take a picture of that. And anything that the dot is hitting, it can cast off as an inanimate object. It doesn't matter, it's not a real person. So now when you stand back in front, the dots will hit you, and they can see your limbs. They can see where the dots are hitting you that it wasn't hitting it in a minute ago. So whereas image analysis takes a lot of processing power, it's really difficult to do. Because you've got these green dots hitting you, it doesn't have to try and figure out who you are. It can see the dots hitting you. So it can see where your arm is relative to your leg and where your head is relative to your leg. It's really powerful. It really knows exactly where you are. I'm going to talk about the exercise benefits of that in a minute. But just to kind of drive home the point, the user interface applications for this are immense. Think about the mouse and the keyboard were the last century's user input. Connect is going to be this century's. Imagine instead of clicking, you just wave your arm and it scrolls. Instead of scrolling with your mouse, you just wave your arm. Instead of clicking, you just make a fist. As well as being cool, it's also a way to get people up and moving a little bit. So can you imagine sitting at a desk for 9 hours, whereas now we move our index finger to click. Imagine just having to do that instead, the difference between that and movement. You might think, yeah, but that's a pain. But the fact is you don't know when you're doing it, that you're exercising, that you're doing physical activity. It's just what you do to click. It's just tricking you into doing physical activity. That's user interface. Microsoft, in their wisdom, let Connect out and kept it closed. They wouldn't let other people develop applications for it. The user community, the program community went mental, started giving out. There was a huge movement online saying, why isn't this thing open? So Microsoft could see from Apple and Android, if you open something up, you get an army of programmers across the world doing your development for you. So you get thousands of people making all these applications, cool applications that you can charge for, but you don't have to pay them. So Microsoft caught on and they opened up Connect. So now anybody can sit down and make their own applications for Connect. And since that happened, things have gotten much cooler. So I'm just going to show a short video now.
We started with a sensor that turned voice and movement into magic.
Xbox, play.
And we thought, this will be fun to play with. And it was. But something amazing is happening. The world is starting to imagine things we hadn't even thought of. Unexpected things. Helpful things. Beautiful things. Inspired things. Which is why, even though the world keeps asking us what we'll do with Connect next, we're just as excited to ask the world the same thing.
So that's kind of some of the applications that people have come up with for Connect. Connect came on the scene maybe a year ago, maybe 18 months ago. And it hasn't got the hype of, say, something like the iPod. But it is a much bigger deal. It didn't get the hype like the iPod because the iPod came on the scene after MP3 players had been established. We knew what they were. We knew what they did. Connect is the first foray into this technology. It's the first to do this, and it does it so well. So in the next couple of years, really expect Connect to be everything. I've talked about Connect for a couple of minutes now and I haven't mentioned exercise. So get back on point now, I'm going to start talking about that. Connect comes with some games that you can plug into. Connect can be plugged into an Xbox. It can also be plugged into just a normal PC. But it comes with some games for the Xbox that kind of focus on fitness. So you can do kind of some, again, kind of semi-static exercises like squats, or this girl's doing kickboxing here. So you stand in front of the Connect, you can see it over there, and the person on the right here, that girl is you. So every time you move, she'll move. And the person on the left is the computer, so you should be matching what she's doing. But because Connect knows exactly where every limb in your body is, it knows where your foot is in relation to your arm, it knows whether you're doing the exercise perfectly or not. So I'm going to go back to the whole education thing. Connect can educate you how to do it perfectly. You can get the optimal results possible when you're using Connect because you know you're doing it perfectly. This is an exercise game. It's brilliant. It's for home exercise. You might think a home exercise is very specific cause, but there's a massive amount of people out there, maybe a lot of overweight people, who are intimidated to go out to the gym. It's not easy to go to the gym, to go where you think everybody knows what they're doing and you think you don't know what you're doing. Some people prefer doing it at home. And if they don't want to come out, then there's no reason why we shouldn't be supporting them at home to do their exercise at home. And Connect can do that. So that's kind of the performance optimization that Connect brings to it. The motivation that Connect brings to the exercise world is huge too. Imagine an idea where at the minute kids are sitting at home, or me, I'm sitting at home, and when you want to shoot in a game, you're sitting back smacking X. Or when you want to kick the ball in a soccer game, you're sitting back smacking X. Whereas now you have to get up and kick, or now you have to get up and punch the zombie, or now you have to get up and do the action that you were just pushing X for. So you're doing physical activity and you're tricked into it. So the motivation for kids in particular, but for adults too, you can trick your kids into going for exercise, which is just a massive thing. If we can start getting Connect into every home, which it will be, and getting used for normal user interface things, the physical activity involved in that is going to skyrocket. So Connect is just fantastic. Watch out for it in the next couple of years. And that kind of brings me on nicely to where I'm going to start to finish up. The future, what's coming next? So I talked mostly today about personal products for tracking your own individual physical activity. I haven't said anything about team products. And the reason that is because the technology for team products hasn't come along. It's still back in the elite domain. Yeah, Premiership teams have amazing systems for tracking every player and the calories and the steps and all that kind of thing. But it's not really viable for an amateur team, for a local team, even for League of Ireland teams to be putting into place because you're talking huge money. And the technology that's coming now in the next couple of years that's going to change that is Galileo. Well, Galileo is the EU's rival to GPS in the US and GLONASS in Russia. And the difference is it works in a similar idea. You put satellites up into the sky, you have a receiver in your hand or connected to your shorts, and from the signals it can receive from the different satellites, it can triangulate your position. The difference between Galileo and the systems that are already there, the Russians and the US, they reserve the best accuracies for the military, being US and Russia. EU aren't going to do that. So whereas GPS, you can get 4 or 5 meters kind of accuracy. With Galileo, you're going to get less than a meter accuracy. The first satellite went up last year. They reckon it'll be up and running in 2014 and completely finished in 2020. So the application for Galileo would be, can you imagine you're a coach of an amateur soccer team and you're at training and your defensive formation keeps breaking down. You can't figure out why. You don't know what's going on. So you send your players out with maybe a €20 Galileo sensor that clips onto their shorts. All 11 players in the pitch have it on. You have an iPad or whatever you might have in your hand, and you have a real-time bird's eye view, maybe looking exactly like this, of where each of your players are, your team as a unit, and how it's moving as a unit. Basically all the bells and whistles that Sky Sports can do in after-match analysis now. You can have it as a live, real-time tool as a coach. American football, if you have a new play and it's just not working, it's not coming together, you can't figure out why. Again, you have this tablet or whatever you might have at the side of the pitch in real time showing a bird's eye view of X's or whatever it might be representing your players and where it's fallen down, who's not where they should be, who's out of line of where they're supposed to be as a unit, are they too deep, are they too far forward, all different things about your team as a unit that you can't, maybe the best coach can now, but you can't do on your own as an amateur coach. So it's a tool that's going to come across in the next 2-3 years. It's not going to be expensive and it will be integrated into amateur sports. The next thing is wearable electronics. So at the minute we have wearable electronics. So you can see this one, and you can buy this online. It's a jacket that you plug your MP3 player into your jacket and put it in your pocket. And the little buttons on your arm become the controls. So you can skip the song and turn up the volume with the buttons on your arm. It looks like wearable electronics, but in reality what they've done and what we all do is we hide the sensors in the t-shirt. So it's not actually an intelligent textile. It's just we've hidden sensors or switches underneath the material. It's grand, it works fine, but the fact you can't fit that much in. We can fit little switches in that like that. But it gets heavy, you can't wash it in the machine if you start putting too much sensors in, things like that. But now we've reached the stage where we can actually print electronics. We can print them and we can weave them. So you can actually print a circuit onto a piece of fabric. So you're gone from the stage where your t-shirt is hiding sensors to the stage where your t-shirt is a sensor. So your t-shirt could be measuring your heart rate. Your t-shirt could be measuring your galvanic skin response to measure how much you're sweating. Your trousers could be measuring your legs in respect to each other. So a sprinter, are you favouring your right leg or your left leg? Your socks could measure gait analysis information. So all your fabric that you're wearing can be a sensor. That's not far away at all. There are companies already printing these electronics, so see that in the next year or 2 years. The next one is incentives. In Ireland, we've got a fantastically successful scheme called the Bike to Work scheme. The idea is the government wanted us up and moving more to get rid of these problems like I talked about at the start of the talk with obesity and things like it. It's fantastically successful. I'd say across the world, we're one of the most successful schemes the way it's run out. You have people now who weren't on a bike since they were 8 doing 30-kilometre cycles at the weekend. Like, it's been massively successful. And there's no reason, and there are calls, for that to be applied to normal activity. Why just cycling? Why not track a person? So say, give them a sensor like Nike Plus and tell them, if you run 100 kilometres in the next month, we'll give you a tax incentive to buy runners or buy shorts or buy athletic gear. And there's no reason it won't work, and the implications and the advancements in health that we would get, it's a no-brainer. It really should be done. In reality, times we live in, it might be a bit of a pipe dream. But what's more realistic and what will be happening, and there are rumours of already happening, are companies like Nike. Say Nike, they trust their sensor. They don't have to worry about people tampering with it because they can build in security protocols themselves. Say they give out cell sensors and I run 100 kilometres and they say, right, well, I'll give you €20 off a pair of runners. Now, Nike aren't all that concerned with the public health, but what they are concerned with is you buying more athletic gear. So if they can force me to get up and get off my ass and do 100 kilometres every month, that's going to make me want to buy more clothes, so they can make more profit off me. So it's kind of, again, a no-brainer incentive scheme that Nike can put into place. There are already systems where, I'm going to go back to activities of daily living, those sensors that I talked about. There are companies who are already doing that for activities of daily living sensors. It's not a far jump over into the exercise domain. So that's the incentive scheme. And the last one I'm going to talk about is again a little video. But I'm just going to talk over the video. And it's called augmented reality. What augmented reality is, augmenting your own vision, your own reality with sensor data. So in a minute this girl is going to go into her sitting room, she puts on a pair of glasses. And the glasses are augmented with sensor data, with data from a computer. So it's here now. So those are the pair of glasses. This is a concept from Nokia. Nokia are already researching this. So you can see the computer interface is augmented onto her vision. So that's kind of an entertainment application. But the exercise application is massive. So you can imagine again, I talked about the MyCoach armband that I sent around, the user interface, and how it's hard to go looking at screens and looking at phones. Well, this is kind of the next step up from something like that armband, where your vision, in the top right, it just says you're doing whatever, you're doing a certain speed. You're doing a certain speed, you're doing a certain distance. You come into a hill and the GPS in your pocket knows where you are, so it knows the elevation of that hill and what heart rate you should be targeting going up that hill and how fast you should be going, how far you've left. All that information that would be on the phone is now just on your display. You might think that's a bit further away, but last Christmas in Harrods in London, there was a woman outside handing out little plastic bracelets, and for free. You just put on the little plastic bracelet and you walked into Harrods. And if you walked up to the watch counter, anywhere you walked around the watch counter, it was projecting an image of a watch onto your arm. So you could look at a screen and see a picture of you with a watch in your arm, so you could try on the watch without trying it on. So that's augmented reality. It took a reality that's purely virtual and put it into the real world, showed you a real world situation of you wearing the watch. So that kind of is going to bring me to a close. I hope I've shown that virtual trainers are a hugely valuable tool. They're not going to replace the personal trainer. But a personal trainer, in consultation with them, we can design virtual trainers to far exceed them in some ways. In our whole evolution, physical activity has never been as important. Our society has kind of evolved to a stage where we don't need to be physically active, but our bodies haven't. So if technology can step in and try and help us to get up and get moving again, then we should all be jumping on board as much as we can. Thanks very much for listening.
Well, thanks very much for that very insightful talk, Shane. I'm just wondering if there's any questions? Well, I had one myself anyway. Just I was wondering about. So you've had a lot of experience. I suppose you've used Nike Plus an awful lot. You've also used MyCoach, the two various ones. And what I was wondering was, so in terms of cost and I suppose even just your own preference, which would you use more? Which would you find most beneficial?
Well, for me, find myself already motivated. I like sports and I like exercise, so I don't have the need for my virtual trainer to motivate me. I do like sports science and I am interested in that. I'm doing the whole course, and I do like targeting specific parts of my fitness and trying to improve them. So for me, my coach is a much better alternative, much better technology. But if you're somebody who finds it hard to get up in the morning, who finds it hard to go exercise in the night, Plus is definitely the best one to go for. As for price goes, they're all about the same. If you already have an iPod, that little sensor is about €16. If you want the heart rate sensor for my coach and the little wristband I passed around, that's about €50. They're not hugely expensive, so cost wouldn't really come into it as far as I was concerned. So yeah, that depends on your goal, really.
Mm-hmm. Very good, very good. Any questions?
Just with the Night Plus.
Oh, you have a...
Just with the Night Plus and my coach, just wondering, they give you obviously training routine. Is there also for different goals, different diet routines they give you as well?
Actually, no, the virtual trainers don't go into diet. And I would imagine that is because there's a legal kind of concern when you start talking about people's diet. So Nike and Adidas are probably concerned about going into that. But it's definitely something that could be integrated into a virtual trainer. And a personal trainer, you're right, would definitely integrate that type of thing into your exercise regime. So a virtual trainer should and will, I suppose, in the future.
Anybody else? I've got another one for you about the Connect. So how sophisticated are they coming in terms of applications, games and that kind of stuff for activity?
So like I said, before they opened it up, Microsoft were doing games and they were cool games. But like anything in this world, ask anybody who's involved in this technology stuff, when they open something up and allow the world developers to get involved in it, which only happened last summer, things get much more interesting. You saw in the video, cool applications.
Yeah.
So rehabilitation is another one that's huge. I don't know if any of you noticed in the video, but there's a kid sitting on a bed, and when he straightened his leg out, he got points for doing it. Rehabilitation for kids is impossible. It's such a hard thing to do, to get kids to do their stretches every day and stuff. If you can monitor that and encourage that using a game, then that's going to increase their motivation and their participation and their adherence hugely. So Connect, kind of the technology behind it hasn't been nearly bottomed out. Microsoft don't need to release another Connect for years. They might release a sleeker one, a smaller one, but applications can take advantage of that hardware for years to come.
Yeah, great. Any final questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for attending. I just wanted to say very quickly that the next session is on the 22nd, I believe, and it's entitled Technology in Elite Cycling. So thank you all very much. And thank you, Tim.